Sticky situations and emergencies. The first thing to say about these is most of them can be avoided by adequate preparation. But now we're going to look at some actions. This is primarily for paraglider pilots, for some sticky situations people find themselves in. So the first one is lack of penetration. So if you're up there, you haven't looked at the forecast, you haven't watched the incoming weather, and you suddenly find that you're struggling to get forward. Right, should never happen, but the most important thing really is you've got to be aware of the Venturi effect over the top of the hill, so stay well out if you possibly can. Obviously, your actions are you fly at trim speed, so hands up, stop using your brakes, use your speed system. You should be familiar with this. You should use it on a regular basis to keep yourself familiar. It's another currency issue, to be current with all the things you might need. Use your speed and try and get out away from the hill and then get down if you can. To lose your height, the best thing to do is to use big ears and speed bar together. You probably know this, but just it can't hurt to reiterate. If you're going to use ears and speed bar together, if you've got your speed bar on, you have to let your bar off, bend your knees, put your ears in, put your bar back on again. Don't put your ears in while you've got full speed bar in, because there's a higher, particularly if it's a bit bumpy, there's a higher risk of getting a tuck if you do that. Okay, and that will give you a significantly increased sink rate and obviously flying at top speed will help you get down. Consider landing if safe. What that means is if you are over the top of the hill and you're going to top land, there's somewhere safe to do it. Even if you're going backwards slightly, to be perfectly honest, with a good technique, you can be going backwards a few kilometers an hour and get away with it. So it's all about preparation. Be ready to grab your rear risers. Don't flare, obviously, if you're drifting backwards. Grab your rear risers and pivot sort of instantaneously, hit the ground, run after your glider, pulling down the thing. So it's a technique. You should be ready to. It's all about being ready in your mind. So sometimes you just have to accept the landing, nothing else you can do. Fly off the end of the ridge. If you can position yourself, if you can't get forward at all, but you're originally drifting back, you can drift to one end. You've got to think about this, because as soon as you start to turn, obviously you're going to drift back even more. But if that's going to take you off the end of a ridge, you'll probably find as you go over the point end of a ridge, you'll start to go back even faster because the air will be pouring around the end. However, you will lose height. And obviously, if you lose height far enough, even if you're a bit far back, if it's a safe area, you might be better off doing that and getting out of the lift. Okay. Finally, let's say you've really cocked up with your pre-flight planning and it's got very windy and you can't penetrate and you're over a spine-back ridge or a cliff or something like that. So you're running out of options here. The final thing that you can do is to gain as much height as possible. So you go back to min-sync, work the lift up as high and as far back as you can, and when you're as high as you can get, you just turn around and you leg off downwind and try and fly over far away from the hazard as possible. There's always a Venturi effect over the top of the hill, so when you get back over flatlands or whatever it is, it's safe to do so a mile, couple of miles downwind. You're likely to find that the wind is less, especially as you lose height and you can land. Obviously turn back into wind to land. Okay. If you are flying a site like that, a cliff, and there's nowhere to go behind it, or it's a spine-back ridge, frankly, you can put yourself in a situation with no options. So in that position, it's all about going back a step, preparation. You think, whoa, this is a spine-back ridge when you're looking around. I think the wind's going to pick up a bit. It's already 14 miles an hour. Don't fly. It's as simple as that. Do not put yourself in a situation where you have no options. Okay. Being dragged. So if you fall over with your paraglider, let's say you've top landed and stumbled or whatever, it's quite easy to get injured if you're being dragged along. So just have a little think about that situation now. Try and roll over onto your front, and you can kind of see where you're going. You may be able to control the wing by pulling down on a rear riser or one of your rear lines. But the best way of doing it is to drop one brake, get hold of the other brake, and go hand over hand with the controls, because you can pull it through the pulley or the keeper until you get all the way up. Well, you can start pulling the brake cascade through and get up to the fabric probably. And that will kill it, because obviously the glider will then stream out one tip into wind, as it were. Okay, so that's the best way of doing it. What you mustn't do, so it's an important thing to understand here, is if you're being dragged, don't just reach back. Some people have done this and they've pulled an A riser. If you pull one or both A risers, obviously what's going to happen, and it's easy when we think about it indoors, is the glider will relaunch. And that has happened to me. They've been dragged, pulled an A riser, got relaunched up in the end, then slammed back down again, and then got dragged anyway. So avoid the A risers. My advice is to go for one control line, go hand over hand. If you're being sucked into a cloud, so you've thermaled up or whatever it may be, and you're finding the lift's a bit strong and you can't escape, then we've got a few options here. So what should we do? Number one is the old big ears and speed bar together again. Try and fly in a straight line so you go towards the edge of the cloud. It's not always easy to know your direction if everything goes hazy, but if you hold a course, clouds are finite, and before you go into it, hopefully you know which is the closest edge to you. If you're in real trouble, if it's a QNIM or something like that, you've been sucked in and big ears and speed bar, you've got full speed and nothing happens for a while, you're still going up or whatever it may be, then your only option is to spiral dive. So a spiral dive you can use if you have learned how to do a spiral dive. So this is a perfect plug, if you like, for advanced glider control courses, because once you've done a few you get really good at them. If you've never done one, they're a bit of a frightening thing to do. So spiral dive, pop it into your spiral dive, and in a spiral you can actually reach sync rates of 12-15 meters per second, which is 3 times as fast as you would come down under an emergency parachute. And it's probably faster than you'd come down even with the glider full stalled. So a spiral dive is the best way of doing it. Obviously, I'm assuming you already know how to do one. It's very important that when you come out of a spiral that you do it either gradually or you have the expertise to know how to do a quick exit. Okay, so wind it into a spiral. When you're out in clear air, take your time. So if you've got lots of energy, you then, gradually unwind it over 2 or 3 turns. Don't suddenly reverse your controls, otherwise you'll have all sorts of pitching issues. Anyway, that's a different lecture. Okay, I put full stall in here, but frankly I think it's a pretty bad idea. I can't think of a situation where it'd be more appropriate to do a full stall than do a spiral dive, but there we go. One thing I did mention there is deploying your emergency parachute. If you're going up too fast, modern emergency parachutes sink you at about 4 to 5 meters per second, which is not a great deal faster than big ears with your speed bar on, which is probably 3.5 meters per second or something like that. So it's not really a sensible option in this situation. So big ears, speed bar, or spiral dive, not and spiral dive. Just make that clear, don't do them both together. Okay, snow and heavy rain. Not very common, and it should be fairly avoidable. You've got a bit of time, but it's worth mentioning that pilots have flown in snow. The particular situation I'm thinking of was somebody took off from a very high alpine thing, and they flew down and they flew through a layer of snow which they didn't see coming. So their glider gradually filled up with snow. There were 2 pilots, and both of them were losing control. The gliders were beginning to stall because the snow was building up in the trailing edge of the wing. So they're both sort of on speed bar trying to get out of there and keep the speed on. One pilot got down okay, the other one actually entered a stall they couldn't recover from and was killed. So I haven't heard of it happening in heavy rain, only in quite heavy snow, but clearly in heavy rain you've got a similar problem. You've got a build-up of water in the trailing edge of the canopy, and also when gliders get soaking wet they don't behave very well. They're much easier for them to stall. It's much easier for them to get cravated and in problems if it's turbulent, and things like big ears become extremely hazardous. You do the big ears and the glider stalls by itself if it's all wet and this sort of stuff. So basically it's bad news. So if it starts to drizzle on you or something like that, I would try and get out of there as soon as possible. If you do need to do big ears to get down, my suggestion, because of the speed thing, is you put a little bit of speed bar on, contrary to what I said a few minutes ago, when you put your ears in, to make sure you don't stall. Okay, so they are big hazards, snow and heavy rain. Just get out of there. Land as soon as possible. Right, water landings. You should never need to do a water landing. Same thing, prevention. It's all about thinking ahead. However, quite a lot of pilots do end up landing in the water for one of 2 reasons. The first one is they do advanced glider control courses over flat water in nice conditions where they've got a life jacket on and there's someone in a rescue boat, and that's fine. That's pretty safe. Someone will be there in a few seconds, and anyway you know it's coming. The other time that it happens is people are flying on coastal sites or things like that, and they're not expecting it. Suddenly they start losing height, the lift dies off, or they found themselves in the wrong bay or whatever, the tide's in and there's nowhere to land, and they land in the sea. If you land in moving water like the sea, where the waves or any swell, there's a good chance that you'll drown. These are very often fatal. There have been several pilots who fly in the UK who have drowned over the last few years. Now, there's plenty of hazards anyway in hang gliding and paragliding without unnecessary drowning, which is just ridiculous. So just don't do it. Find yourself only fly if you've got a landing area within range. You can't rely, as I'm sure you know, on ridge lift being completely consistent. Okay, however, just a word about if you go into the water on a paraglider and the lines get tangled around your legs and things, then you're in big trouble and you'll probably die. So in order to minimize the chances of this, this is the procedure. If you know you're going to land in water, if you're going to fly over the coast regularly, I would buy a hook knife. They cost about 10 or 12 quid, and if the worst should happen, you can cut yourself out. At least you stay alive. Okay, if you think that you might land in water, as you're coming down, the trick is to start undoing your buckles. Take off any gloves you've got, undo the buckles on your harness, leg straps and chest strap. Don't jump out at height. Someone's been badly injured doing this. It's quite hard to judge your height over a featureless body of water. But as soon as you touch the ground, you want to be out of there and get away from your paraglider. There's a way you can land as well. We're so programmed, we knew we were trying to land into wind because it's nice and soft. Obviously it doesn't matter in water, and it's better to land going downwind. And the reason is you hit the water, you'll stop, and then the paraglider will pitch right over you and go nose down. So you'll get a sail pulling the lines away from you. Keep them tight, which is great because you should be frightened of those lines. They're really nasty to get tangled up in them. And then you just get out and swim away. Few things to say. People have done this before. They've landed in the water, they've got out, they've got away from their canopy, and then they've drowned. And what they've done is they've tried to collect or save their precious equipment. You basically can't do it. The only way you can rescue a paraglider from the water is if you've got a boat and, help, really. You have to like pull up a cell, empty all the water out, and then the next cell, empty that. Or on a beach where the water is sort of less than knee height. Just to give you an idea, there is approximately 5 or 6 cubic meters of air in an inflated paraglider. Air weighs just over 1 kilo per cubic meter, so 5 or 6 kilos. Water weighs 1 ton per cubic meter, so a paraglider full of water is obviously 5 or 6 tons. So the idea that you can sort of swim around and pull it's just not going to happen. That's ignoring just the drag, that's just the weight. So forget it. Leave it and go and get a boat. As simple as that. That's my advice. So carry a hook knife, remove your gloves, unclip, land downwind, and leave it. Get out of there. Right, trees next. Tree landings are quite a lot of pilots have landed in trees, so I've heard. And if you land in a tree and it's a nice soft tree, it's pretty embarrassing, but it shouldn't really do you any harm. You might make a little bit of damage to your canopy, you might skin a line or something like that, but very often people have got away with it with nothing more than a slightly bruised ego. However, pilots have been very seriously injured, life-changingly injured by hitting trees. So there's a subtle difference. If you're going over an area where there's a lot of trees and you're losing height and you see a clearing or a path, the natural human tendency is to try and go for that. But unless you're absolutely certain you can get into it without the trees affecting you touching them or being rotated in or whatever, don't do it. Because people get badly injured if they clip a tree. If they catch one wingtip on a tree, get spun in, then they pile into the ground, they get badly injured. But on the other hand, if you have a nice big soft tree and you just land in it, you can grab hold of it, get out of your kit, and then recover that later. So first thing to do, if you're going to land in a tree, commit, pick a nice one and land in it. If you are going to fly over trees regularly, like there's a club in the eastern states of the Tennessee in the USA called the Tennessee Tree Toppers, and they all fly over I don't know what the range amounts to, the Alleghenies or something, with all the time, and they all carry 30 meters or so of fishing line or something like that, and a whistle. And the reason for that is if you get stuck in a tree, then people on the ground, if you're on a load of trees, it's really hard for them to see you. I'm assuming you're not going to hit one tree on its own, hopefully. So the whistle helps attract people and then find you. And the fishing line is just to let down so that someone can pass a rope up to you, tie off and get down safely. There has been a case of someone landing in a tree, being perfectly all right, chatting to the people on the ground, and then he tried to climb down he didn't want to wait for help or a ladder or whatever, and fell out of the tree and was killed. It was a really sad story. So those are trees, yeah. Be equipped, and yeah, you know, if you're going to land in a tree, do it properly. Okay, so here you are. Bullet points: legs together, knees up, protect your eyes, hang on, secure your canopy, carry string and a whistle. Okay. Power lines. Ugh, these make you shudder. Okay, it's worth taking almost any action to avoid power lines. Really horrible things. If you land in a power line, then you are not too much at risk while you're clear of the ground. But if obviously the electricity can short through, if there's power there, it can give you horrendous injuries. So if I was flying towards power lines, I saw them at the last minute, I'd turn and land downwind if necessary. I'd rather risk a broken leg than getting caught up in power lines. However, if somebody does it, or if you see someone else who's caught in power lines, there's an important process to remember. If you look on every HT power line in the UK, at any rate, you see a plaque like this with a free phone number for the National Grid Company, which is actually 0800 40 40 90. I think it's the same for all of them. You probably won't remember that, but it doesn't matter. The plaque's there on everything. You need to ring it, and a human being has to tell you that the power is switched off. And the reason for that is a lot of these power grids have an automated system. So if something like a branch drops across a couple of lines and shorts it out, the power goes off. You can imagine if you're the pilot, you know the power's gone off, it will stop sparking, you start climbing down, and then it sends another pulse of power down the line to try and blow off the branch, usually 2 or 3 pulses. So obviously, you know, it'd be a nightmare if you just touching the pylon when you were trying to get out, or someone was up on a ladder trying to get you out of there. So speak to a human being, tell them the number of your particular pylon, where you are, they will confirm that the power is off, then you can get rescued. So you might be up there for some hours. So avoid them, that's my advice. Damaged canopy. If you are flying and you've got a cravat or something breaks, or you've had a mid-air collision, somebody's put a boot through your canopy or something like that, just take a second to think about it. Am I in control or not? If you're not in control, if you are unable to prevent the glider turning or diving or whatever it may be, don't delay, just deploy your emergency parachute. He who hesitates is lost. Just take a second. Obviously, some tucks and cravats and things like that can be cleared, but if you can't do it, don't wait. Sling the old silk out. Okay, so use your emergency parachute. Okay, now landing. Another area, another bit of airmanship that's really important in a sticky situation where people do get injured is just on the landing. With paragliders in particular, the issue is when people try and turn and land. They're wonderful aircraft, they turn really well, they land really well, but they don't turn and land. So your landing priorities are these to avoid hook turns. Number one, obviously you choose a safe area to land in. This is a picture of somebody breaking all the rules here. Choose a safe area. Land with your wings level. That's really important. It's the hook angle that gets you. If you land banked, then what happens is, as you flare, or even if you don't flare, you touch the ground, but the canopy is still exerting a sideways force and it can flick you round, and then that's when you get injured. So wings level, second, and thirdly, into wind if you can. When you're in a school, the instructor always says land into wind, because you know it's nice and slow and what have you. However, it's not the ultimate priority. If you land a bit out of wind, you'll be going faster and you might fall over, you might have to run quite quickly. But landing banked but into wind is a recipe for disaster, and this is quite common for pilots to do it in top landing. They come into top land, get a little bit low, so they try and hook it round at the last minute. You're better off accepting the outer wind landing. If you're a hang glider pilot, it's much more difficult unless you've got wheels, in which case you remain prone and just let the wheels take it and land out of wind. But those are the order of your priorities. So safe area, wings level, and then into wind if possible. And then finally, if you have an accident or you witness an accident, what do you do? First of all, help. If you see somebody else, you know, it could be you next time, so land and give them assistance. Call for help if necessary. If you've done first aid and you know a bit about first aid, then by all means get stuck in. If you're not sure what to do, or the person has obviously got a serious injury, don't delay, just call for help by ringing 999 or 112, whatever it is. If you're ringing for help, they're going to want to know where you are. So if you know the grid reference or whatever, that's fine. Very often the 999 or 112 pin all goes to the same office call centre, will ask you for a postcode, and obviously a lot of our sites don't have postcodes unless you're lucky enough to be on an airfield or so what you do is you try and give them the six-figure grid reference. If they don't have the grid reference, or you don't have the grid reference, then you start talking about explaining, you know, turn left here and, you know, it's very difficult to do. What I would recommend is that you get the app What 3 Words on your mobile phone. It's free, takes you about 10 seconds to download it, and all the emergency services that I'm aware of, certainly in outlying areas, and definitely the mountain rescue people who you're quite likely to come across, all use the What 3 Words thing. So if you're not familiar with it, just type in, so it's the word what and then the number 3 and then words, and that gives you a thing where it says your location is when you open it, and it's 3 unrelated words, like, I don't know, football, custard, you know, endless or something like that, and each 3-word combination refers to one area on the Earth's surface. Incredibly, I think it's only about 3 square meters or something like that, some tiny space. So it's a very accurate position locator, and the emergency service in the UK do use it, so get it. There are other things you can get as well. There are things like OS Locate. The Devon-Air ambulance had one. There are various things that will actually give you the grid references on your mobile phone of where you are, but I'd recommend What 3 Words. That's the way forward. They will be able to find you then. Okay, so went off on one there. So pack and weigh down the canopies, get other people out of the air. If you've got a radio system, or if your club has a system for getting people out of the air, some of them have a signal, like everybody's at a right hand big ear. It means everybody has to land because a helicopter's coming in. It'd be pretty galling if you had someone lying on the ground who is their heart is in trouble, they're not breathing properly, they've got a defibrillator in a helicopter and it can't land because someone's flying around and doesn't want to get out of the way. So make sure everybody lands. And then, whatever happens, you've done your first aid, they've gone off to hospital, whatever it may be, submit an incident report form. So you can submit an incident form through the BHPA website. You don't even have to be a BHPA member. Just go onto the BHPA website and you will find there's a button on there, this one, Submit IR, and it produces a report, and it has lots of questions, lots of boxes you fill in. It's part of the European accident programme. Everybody does it in Europe. It might ask things that are completely irrelevant, like the make of the emergency parachute, which wasn't used. So it doesn't matter, just ignore all the boxes you can't fill in, and eventually you'll get to one which is a little description of what happened. So what's really important is who it happened to, who you are, and what happened. If you think someone else has submitted the incident report form, it doesn't matter. Submit one anyway. The technical team of the BHP are fairly able, competent to know if they get 4 incident reports about someone having a broken ankle on the same site on the same day, they can figure out it's all the same guy. Usually the pilot says it wasn't my fault, and everybody else says it was the pilot's fault. But anyway, don't worry about it, put it in. If it's happened to you, you put one in. If you witness one, put it in as well. It's information that's vital to everybody and can help make our sport safer in the future. So there we go. Okay, that's it. So that's basic airmanship. It's all about preparation, thinking ahead, making the right decisions, really, and pre-flight checks, bottom line. Follow all those things and your flying will be much safer. So I hope that's useful.